Roll for initiative. Are there any other 3-word phrases that incite such excitement in players? Apart from maybe you level up. For those that play TTRPGs that have any sort of combat, you'll probably encounter some form of initiative, even if they're more loosey-goosey or more restricted, but the most common one, who can forget, is the initiative that we find in D&D. You roll a dice, you add a thing, that's your number. But are there any others? Yes, there are. I've just said there are. And with that being the case, could there be more initiatives that potentially are more exciting and fun for you to use? And when I say that, I'm not suggesting that if you're going to play D&D, use other initiatives, because I've made a video similar to that, and boy did that get hate. People don't like some initiatives, and some people think that it's really dumb to have other kinds of initiatives in other games, and you know what? That's not a bad opinion to have. It's good to have games with their own initiatives, with their own designs that are intended for a specific thing. So, with that being the case, let's go over some of those really cool design choices in the form of combat orders, or, as is more commonly and widespreadly known, initiative. First of all, the classic, the D20, the D&D or D20 fantasy system of you roll the D20, you add your agility bonus or whatever, your initiative bonus or whatever it is, and you get a number. I rolled a 10, I have a +4, therefore I got a 14, but the enemy got an 18. My other player friend got a 12. So as a result, that's an order that we're going to go in. So, what are the bonuses of this? Well, if you like randomness, then you'll like this, and it really is randomness, because it is a 20-sided die giving a full range of 20. Meanwhile, your bonuses will likely be between like -1 or -2 if you're really bad for some reason, and then going up to maybe like +5 and maybe +7 or +10 if you have like specific feats and abilities. But apart from that, it's usually in a minor range compared to the massive range of a D20, meaning that D20 fantasy and the initiative that uses that roll system, yeah, it can cause a lot of randomness, which, again, as I've said, if you love randomness, you'll love that system. There are people that love the idea of randomness is cool. We roll the dice, therefore, what's going to happen? People like that, so they like this random initiative system. Who knows whether I, with low health, are going to go first or last in this initiative? Or, yes, I'm a rogue, but hey, this combat, I might roll a 25 in order to get my initiative bonus, but then this time I got a 5 because I rolled really bad, for example. So who knows what's going to happen? If you like that sort of vibe when it comes to combat, then you'll like this system. And it's because it's random, and it really is randomness. And we know this is randomness as a focus because, as a comparison, Baldur's Gate 3. Baldur's Gate 3, of course, is very similar to D&D. In fact, it's basically just D&D with a bunch of quirks and tweaks to make it its own thing. And initiative in Baldur's Gate, you'd think it would work the same way, but it doesn't. It uses the initiative plus on your dice sort of system, but the dice in question is a D4. So, if you have 4 people that have +1, then yeah, it's probably going to be random who's going to go next. But if you have a rogue with +5, or a monk with +5, for example, or +3 or whatever it is, then chances are they're going to go first. If you have someone with really bad initiative, then they're probably going to go last, because that D4 is only 1 to 4. Meanwhile, a bonus can get much higher than the results on a D4, which means that it really is down to the bonuses on your sheet. It's dependent on what your abilities are, and not what did this big dice roll. Instead, it's what did this little dice roll. Okay, it's more like, what's my initiative? And then I add this big number of my initiative onto this tiny dice. The tiny dice feels more like the bonus on top of this big thing that you have, which is your initiative number. So that sort of switch from D20 randomness to D4 kind of secure results, but what your bonuses are really matters. As I say, a rogue or someone with high dex probably going to go first. But if you have something like if you look it up, there's loads of items in that game that give you some kind of initiative bonus. So as a result, if you have loads of those, you're definitely going to go first. And when you have a full sort of like your party, but also the enemies, if everyone's using a D4, then it truly is down to just what is your agility bonus. And they didn't really need to do that, because it's a system, it's a automated system, so it's not like they're trying to like lower the numbers to make it more simple mathematically because it does it all for you. It's done that because, again, of the D4, making it so the results are smaller and the bonuses matter more. So it makes it less random, which means that your stuff, your character stuff, matters. Isn't that cool? Well, it's up to you. I'm not saying use this for D&D, but it certainly wouldn't be a hard change, and it would certainly make it so that your character's alert feat, for example, would really matter. If you're a rogue, that means if you're a rogue assassin with your alert feat, you're definitely going to get that bigger sneak attack bonus on the first turn. So, wouldn't that be cool? That's up to you. They're both D&D akin things, but it's up to you. But while we're talking about small dice, let's consider the Borg games. Not board games, Borg games. Mork Borg, Cyborg, Pirate Borg, even other games that include the word Borg. But the thing that differs in this case is that when it comes to rolling initiative, and you do roll initiative in this system, is first of all you roll a d6. So, yeah, like a d4. So what is it, d6 plus your agility bonus? No. You roll a d6 to determine who goes first, you or the enemies. So you roll a d6, if it's 4 higher, then you guys go first. If it's 1 to 3 on that d6, the enemies go first. Let's hope we don't roll a 1 to a 3, but then comes the question of, okay then, well, we know we're going first, but then when does each person on our side go first? Do we just choose? Well, in the book, if you look at the initiative thing, it says, okay, yeah, roll a d6 to determine, but then also roll a d6 for each of you and add your initiative bonuses to it, like your agility, and that'll determine where you go on your side. So, it's, if you think about it, it's not the whole list of initiative, like Baldur's Gate and D&D, it's, let's first of all, split the initiatives in half, so it's the players or the enemies, who's going to go first, but then on those two sides, who's going to go first for each side on that side. Does that make it easier? I don't think so. I don't think that makes it easier, and I think that's why a lot of people kind of homebrew the removal of that part. They basically go, right, okay, roll a d6, yeah, are the players going first? Cool. You guys just decide, or kind of go whenever you want. You guys are going to all take a turn, and then when you've all taken a turn, all the enemies take a turn. There is a significant change when you consider the likes of splitting the initiative, which you might see later on with the other discussions that we're going to talk about. And that is, if you roll to see whether all of the players go first, or all of the enemies go first, whoever goes first has a big advantage, because as the rounds continue, whoever got first on that first round, they have done more damage, it's likely. They've done more hurt to the people who are having to just react and survive that first volley from whichever side. So that means, if the enemies go first in a Mork Borg game, it's really bad, especially if you have multiple enemies, because multiple enemies doing all multiple attacks, spreading their attacks, maybe even focusing down on one person, yeah, that can result in death pretty quickly. So, the Mork Borg games, we got tripped on that word then, the Mork Borg games, the Borg games in general, they use a d6, you add your agility bonus, but we kind of just strip that away in some instances. But it does have this d6 split the party aspect, which is quite interesting. It's using a bunch of the Mork Borg games and other systems. There are other systems that use the whole who goes first out of the good guys or the bad guys. So as I say, people do the whole d6. Do you get 4 plus? Cool, that means the players go first, therefore kind of choose amongst yourselves when you're going to go. Just go whenever. And speaking of going whenever, choosing when you're going to go, Death in Space. Death in Space might be one of my favourite games in terms of how it uses its initiative. Out of all the games I've seen, played, read, all this stuff, the way that initiative works in this game is so up my alley, it's insane, and I love it. Let me explain it to you. So, do you know how I mentioned the whole idea of go whenever? Whenever you want to go, you choose. It's kind of like that. First of all, it says who does go first, who is surprised. If that can't be determined, then roll a dice. You know, the whole roll the dice, split it down the middle, 50-50 sort of thing, flip a coin, who's going to go first. If you can't decide who was surprised or who initiated things, then if you can't figure that out, just roll the dice to determine. After that happens, who goes first? Is it the players? Is it the enemies? Whoever it is, they take a turn. So let's say it's the players. The player takes a turn. Bang. They shoot someone with a gun, they're in space. They do another action, they lock down something, they open an airlock door, that kind of thing. But then comes the question of, who goes next? There's no roles being mentioned here. What happens? Well, that person who acted then gets to choose who goes after them. Friend or foe. And that, to me, is incredibly interesting. It's not just a case of, oh, well, I as the player went first, so Joe, you go next, and then, Bill, you go next, and I guess you go next, Phil, because we've went through everybody. You can choose as the player, do I want the enemy to go next? And you always choose who is going to go next. In that order, you always choose who's going to go after you, friend or foe. And that distinction of you choosing to potentially let an enemy go after you, is an incredibly interesting change. And it says in the book explicitly, but you can kind of work it out, this is to emphasize the idea that you guys are a unit. You are a team together. That sort of cohesive unit that can decide who's going to go first. I'll go first, cool, I'll let off the shot. Then when he's weakened, that's when you're going to dive in and run. Or maybe you're a tank, you run in first, you go first. And then maybe you want to let the enemies move in closer so that you can then allow someone else who's hiding to jump into melee with them. That kind of thing. You can decide, because you are a cohesive unit that needs to be tactical in order to survive. And again, there's no grids that are involved in this game. It's all quite theatre of the mind. But despite that theatre of the mind aspect, that choosing of initiative is so interesting to me. Like, just getting to choose, it's so cool. I love that to death. And I think more games, I'd say I'd want to see it in more games, but honestly, they would have to give an explicit mention to how good that sort of simple and beautiful change is. You can probably tell that I like this game and its use of initiative. Before I ramble on about something that I love, let's talk about something else I love, because that whole idea of choosing when you're going to go is something that's right up my alley. And you can see that if you've ever watched any of my videos talking about the games that I am making. That's right, Sanctum and Blaster. They're designed for my fantasy and my sci-fi games, respectively. Sanctum and Blaster, they have initiative systems, obviously, because it's a tactical combat game. There are grids, there are potentially minis or whatever you're going to put on the map, there are feet in terms of movement, you can push people around the battlefield, it's a lot of fun. Anyway, when it comes to how you go first, or combat order, or initiative, whatever it is, you're going to choose your combat order. And how it works is, unless you are surprised, the players go first. The players get to choose amongst them who's going to go first. Sounding familiar now? Now, here's what happens next. Instead of, we get to choose who's going to go, the player goes first. Then, the GM gets to pick an enemy to go next. Then, a player. Then an enemy, then a player, and you go back and forth until everyone in the combat has taken a turn. And of course, if one side has like 3 people and the other one has 6, then eventually you can't go back to that side. So you just keep going through that side until everyone's took a turn. Fair enough. One thing I didn't mention about Death in Space in comparison to Sanctum, now that I think about it, is when it comes to choosing when you're going to go, in Death in Space, that first round, once it's blasted on through, you then go on to the next one, and the same thing happens. Except, what I've noticed through design, or like running games that I've designed, is that the idea of letting people choose is good. But when you give them so much, like give them all the choice, choice every time, it can feel overwhelming to some players. As I say, you get to choose when you're going to go. So when things start to change, get stressful, saying, okay, who's going to go next? And then pointing at one player in the group, and they're sat there going, well, I can see 2 of my player friends who, they're both on really low health, and whoever I don't choose to go next after me is definitely going to die because of whatever situation we're in. So, how Sanctum and Blaster work, it's similar but different in a significant way. When you go through the combat, whoever goes first gets a turn card that says first on it. The GM picks an enemy, the enemy gets a turn card saying second. You can see where this is going. Then you keep going until everyone's got a turn card. Then, once the turn goes to the bottom and everyone's taken a turn, it goes right up to the top, and then whoever has the first card goes first, and then the order continues that way. Turn cards, by the way, you can use anything. You can use like sticky notes, you could use playing cards, you can use cards from other games, tokens, whatever you want, as long as you've got like a numerical depiction of who's going to go when. So, you run through the initiative until everyone's had a go, and then it stays the same. So that first time, you choose when you're going to go. It's a tactical choice. As combat, you want to know when you're going to go, and then once combat is starting to get a bit more chaotic and it's in the fray, you're then locked into this initiative as you go down. Just like most games we know, where you roll initiative and then that's the set list as you keep going down the list. When you get around that first and then second round, then third round, the initiative stays the same, which is a significant idea, because a static initiative allows you, as a designer and player, whatever, to use abilities and to implement abilities in my design where they last for one round. If you do that when the initiative is fluid and freeform, what then happens is players can go, okay, on this turn, I'm going to cast an ability that lasts for however long it takes to get to my next turn. I went first, then the second round, I go last, essentially making it not one round, making it 2 rounds that it's lasted for. So you can artificially extend things and cause problems and imbalances by doing that. But with a static initiative, it removes this sort of choice overload, this, when we're going to go, that's all cut out because you get to choose that first time, and then the next time, it's all up to whoever's got the choice on their turn card to go next. First, second, third, etc. It means that it's simpler, and also you're handing out choice cards as opposed to rolling dice and then arranging all this stuff. You just dive into combat. Combat starts. Who's going first? You are? Cool. He's a card. Who's going second? You get a card. You just move on. Once combat starts, you're in, and things start to go. And then, once you've chosen these things, once you've decided you've got low health, you go first so you can run into cover. You are third after that enemy who's just taken a turn, so how about you engage them in combat? And you can sort of choose this stuff, and then, once that first round's happened, you then get into the usual swing of, right, now we're going to have to react accordingly and not choose when we're going to go because we had that one choice. Simple, tactical, and incredibly quick. I like that design. I hope other people do. But, of course, I don't want to sit here and talk about what I've made the whole time. That's why I put Sanctum and Blaster this far down the list. So, let's move on. And a game that does something very similar to this, the whole turn card usage of initiative kind of thing, is Dragonbane. Dragonbane is a super fun game. It has rules-light elements, it's fantasy all over the place, and it has very sort of adventure focus where your characters aren't superheroes. You have to be using your initiative, literally using your equipment in order to survive and get through, and how the monsters and combat works is very interesting. There's turn cards, except like you're going to have the GM perform a magic trick, they hold out these turn cards, and the players get to choose one. And then, they turn them over and go, I've got 7. One person says, I've got 4. Then the GM goes, I've got 5. Cool, that means 4 goes first, then 5, then 7. You go in ascending order. Cool, fair enough. The way that it differs, however, is that once that's happened, and you've drawn the cards, you then give them back. Because the next round, you choose them again. I say choose, you draw them again, it's random. So that means that initiative, the rounds, they're very sporadic, because the first one, you can go first, second round, you've drawn a really low card, meaning that means you're going to go like 7th this time if there's a lot of enemies. So, it can be quite chaotic from round to round, which is very much in the intention of Dragonbane. It's simple, a bit flashy. However, I'm not that much of a fan of systems that make you do initiative for every single turn, especially when it's like a determined thing, like, oh, I go this, and then it not be carried on to the next turn. Some people might hear that and go, well, why? It's nothing in like objectively bad in my mind. I think it has a lot of strong merit. I like the idea that you can randomly pick these cards to get random initiatives each time. It makes things like surprising and what's going to happen, but it can result in a lot of sort of weirdness and slowing things down the table where you have to go, right, who's going to go, okay, there, yeah, okay, we're going to go first, who's got 4, there's a lot that can happen. Again, nothing bad, a lot of merit to it, but I find it a bit weird and a bit junkier. What is very fun though, what is really interesting about that sort of idea, is that when it comes to everyone drawing their cards, some enemies get to draw cards multiple times. So if you, as a wizard and as a little barbarian boy, whoever you are, you're then facing off against an enemy who then gets to draw 2 or maybe 3 cards while you get 1 card each, well, that's going to be very bad, isn't it? Or very fun, because that creature gets to act a bunch of different ways. Meanwhile, you as the wizard gets to cast a spell and then sit there in horror as the enemy gets to act again and move again and attack again as they pull all these different cards. That's very interesting. I like that a lot. So, you might like that if that sounds very interesting to you, but again, it can result in a lot of randomness, a lot of weirdness, stuff can slow down, and it doesn't allow for tactical sort of approaches in a lot of areas, which is absolutely fine. People don't play Dragonbane to have a tactical chess-like experience. They play it to have an adventure. That's what people want from it. So, don't complain about a lack of something if that isn't the intention. Again, design, intention matters a lot. So, let's move on. Because let's be honest, I could say Dragonbane X, this game Y, which one's better? That doesn't make sense, because you can't compare apples to oranges. They have different design intention. To make an example of my point, let's talk about Draw Steel. I don't have that book, but Draw Steel is, of course, MTDM's TTRPG, their first TTRPG, the fantasy TTRPG they came out with. It's very tactical heavy, it's very combat heavy, it's very heavy in terms of rules, but one thing that it does for combat is that it goes right. Instead of all this turn card or rolling initiative business, instead, whoever goes first, we determine it usual ways that we do in other games, who isn't surprised goes first. The players go first. They take a turn. Then the enemy gets a turn. Then the players get a turn. Then an enemy gets a turn. Until everyone has had a turn in some way. Except when it comes round to the next turn, the choices happen again. So it's kind of like Death in Space. It's kind of like Sanctum of Blaster. It's kind of like Dragonbane. There's randomness on who gets to go each time. It's not a set initiative once it's already been laid out. So that means it's more along the way of Death in Space. That sort of vibe. But because of its tactical approach in comparison to Death in Space, which is more theatre of the mind, it does mean that abilities have different ways that they have like lengths of time, as I previously explained, where one round of a length of time can be stretched somewhat if you take initiatives at different times. I won't go on about that one too much because there's not much else to add really. You've kind of covered it all just from saying that, but there is something to mention when it comes to like games giving you the choice all the time on every turn. Trying to manage that in a tactical way when there's multiple players and multiple enemies, it can become quite of an overhead activity. And if you think it doesn't, I'm going to reiterate a story that I've told before. Goblin Quest is a game that I've mentioned before. I think it's fantastic. It's really fun. It's a Grant Howitt, sort of design beauty where you play as goblins trying to go on a quest. Great name. And the whole idea in Initiative, can you call it that? It's not a game where there's combat and initiative. The whole game, in a way, is constantly in some way of an initiative, because the game is played in, right, you set out a quest. You have to try and get and complete the quest before you die. And how you determine whether you die is you roll a d6. Did you succeed? Did you fail? Did you get a mixed success? That's, whatever. But why am I bringing it up here? Because it kind of works in like a round system where, one person goes, another person goes. Then the last player goes, and then once everyone has acted, that's when you get to go again. It's not like I go, then the same person goes, then the same person... no one's hogging the spotlight. Everyone has to take a turn, everyone has to roll the dice in some way, which means that someone is going to have to go after that other player that rolled a mixed success, and as a result, you're going to get a -1 to your roll, which is a thing that happens. It's probably not a mixed success, I forgot that, but there's a roll that you can get in Goblin Quest, which means that the next person gets a minus to their roll. There's another one that gives you a plus to the roll, don't get me wrong, but that minus means that, well, we've acted, but you haven't, and you're going to have to take that -1 to your roll now. That can happen, and it is quite funny. But, with that in mind, the whole everyone has to take a turn thing, I've run Goblin Quest a couple of times, and when doing so, 3 players were involved, myself and 2 of the players. And despite the fact that both Draw Steel and Goblin Quest both go for a similar vibe, this is like an optional rule for Draw Steel where they say, right, once you've acted, you can have like a card or a token or something that when you've acted, you flip it over to represent the fact that you can't go again until next round. I did this, of course, because this is my curse. I come up with ideas that I find out later down the line has just made someone $4 million. Anyway, so, anyway, so, with Goblin Quest, the whole everyone has to take a turn thing can get confusing, because even after one turn, discussing what happens, having a laugh, even having a drink, which we never did, so we were all sober when this happened, but, you know, if you're having a drink, pizza, just having a fun time playing Goblin Quest and passing around the spotlight as to who goes next, even then, when there's 3 players, we found it confusing. We found it confusing to go, right, who's went? Wait, I've went. I know I have, but have you? Was that last round? Or was it that can happen when there's 3 players, no enemies, and no interruptions. When there's no outside things like enemy actions or weird reactions to abilities. When it's just, I roll a dice, there's one of 3 or 4 results, and it affects the next person sometimes, we still found it confusing. So when I have multiple tactical confusing stuffs, and then you're told, right, to make it easier, use this token turnover system that I just thought of when using Goblin Quest one time, it doesn't really help to stop the confusion. And if a whole tactical game is built on that, God, I can imagine how many people have went, wait, have I acted this turn? Oh, I thought you acted. No, I didn't. Oh, okay. I guess you didn't act this turn. You know, all this stuff can happen. So, again, I just want to throw that in there because I saw Draw Steel do this and I thought, oh, that feels like it could get lost in the reeds, and it will definitely get lost in the reeds if a very rules-like game can have you get lost in who's went. Anyway, so, to move on from that. Without indicators, without tokens, without cards, without rolling a dice and adding numbers and writing it down, all that stuff, without that happening, it can result in confusion. So, what is a way to alleviate it? Who knows? We're still to figure that out, like much of science's many queries, but if there's one game that does sort of alleviate this issue, like other games tend to do, that is Daggerheart. I have the box hiding in that shelf, but it's too bulky and it's shy, so I'm not going to bring it out. But Daggerheart, what it does in terms of initiative is, in combat, you get to go. The enemies get to play. Who gets to go? You choose. Whoever wants to go gets to act. You could have Darren act every turn, if you wanted to. Except, when that happens, you then have to make a roll. Of course, it's a game of dice, but when you make the roll, you're rolling 2d12s. You roll them together, and one's called your hope die, the other one's called your fear die. If you roll with hope, you hit or miss, and you get a hope. If you hit or miss and get a fear, that means the GM gets to actually activate an enemy, and they get to go. So, the enemies don't get a turn unless the players roll with fear, which, if you're rolling 2d12s, is a 50-50. So, 50-50, each time a player rolls, they're going to activate an enemy who gets to take a turn. Which, if you think about it, it does mean that, theoretically, a combat could occur in which the enemies never get to act, because miraculously, every single time, the players roll with hope, which would be insane, unlikely, because again, 50-50, but possible. Anyway, the opposite of that as well is, it's possible that the players could roll with fear every single time, and if they roll with fear every single time, that's not the same as rolling with hope every single time, where the enemies don't get to act, because if you roll with fear, it means the enemies get to take an action, and then it goes back to the players. As well, the GM can spend a fear token in order to give an enemy a turn. So if they have them, they can give them more turns, they can give them more sides of the battle, they can remove conditions if they want. There's things they can use these fear tokens for, but again, if we're going to go back from who's went, who's gone, what if we had a combat system where it didn't matter? We didn't have to consider turn order, who's went, because whoever wants to go can go. Just, I guess we'll just hope to RNGesus that you don't roll with fear again and give the enemies another time to go, when we'd like to just sit here and just attack them, wail on them, and keep rolling with hope. But yeah, it's a very interesting sort of deviation from a strict rolling system and a malleable who wants to go whenever sort of system, without having much in the way of complexity, because anyone can go whenever. It's very fluid, very simple, so I can see why people would like that, even if it could cause issue because you're down to the dice as to who goes next, as opposed to things like balance. And if we're going to deviate from the usual rules of D&D Initiative, where you roll and you go in an order, if we're going to go for the whole sort of player determines enemy turn sort of idea, kind of, there is a couple of games that do something like this. Liminal Horror and Mothership, both horror games. Strange. They both do a very similar things in terms of their initiative, and the rolls that you make to determine initiative don't determine when you go in terms of initiative, but more specifically, do you act before the enemy? Because the two of them both focus on player outrunning or escaping or surviving the enemy, as opposed to combating the enemy with fisticuffs and spells. So as a result, the rolls work like this. You roll against your speed to determine when you go in the initiative. If you pass your roll, so it's not a just determine your number that gets put into an order sort of system, you roll and then you check your stat. Did I roll underneath my stat? If I did, great. That means I succeeded. If I didn't, that means I failed. What happens next? Well, those that failed go after the enemy. Those that succeeded go before the enemy. So think of it like a Jason Voorhees sort of scenario, okay? If you succeed, you go before Jason and you beeline it in the opposite direction, or be a stupid sort of hero in those movies and pick up a shotgunner and act and try to combat the big evil boy with a hockey mask. Anyway, those that fail have to go after Jason. So Jason stood there going, well, they've run off, leaving you guys here. So then the enemy or the Jason, whoever you're talking about, then gets to turn to those that didn't succeed, those that weren't fast enough, and attack them. So it's more of a who outruns the enemy focus, as opposed to, again, rolling to determine when inevitably you're going to combat the enemies with sword and steel, that sort of stuff. But if you want to remove all talk of rolls, tactical choices, abstractions as to who goes when, then you can look to the likes of Call of Cthulhu and other games made by Chaosium and a bunch of other games. I've seen in my comment section, specifically on TikTok I think, when I mentioned talks of initiative, how they do their initiatives. People were doing a very similar thing, and this is dex numbers, or just numbers, initiative numbers, speed numbers, whatever you want to call them. But in Call of Cthulhu, it's your dex number. And if this basically means, who's got the highest dex? I have 80. Cool. That means, let's look at the enemy. Yeah, you go first. And you go in terms of who's got the highest dex down. And you might be sitting there thinking, oh, well, the dex numbers, how do you get your dex numbers? Well, you make them at character creation. Oh, so do those change? Not really, unless you go against a supernatural or specific strange entity that can lower your dex. So, as a result, if you have 80 dex, chances are, in a combat, you're going to go first. Meanwhile, if you have bad dex, that means you're probably going to go towards the bottom. And this all depends on what the enemy has, because on the GM side of the table, theoretically, they could just write down, right, cool, let's look at everyone's dex orders. You've got 80, 70, 60, cool. First, second, third, enemy's got 50, and then go down like that. Behind the screen, they could just have the initiatives, or the dex orders, of all their players, write them down, and then when it comes to fight, right, what enemies have we got? And then just slot them in wherever they can make a gap. So, that means combat, once it starts, if you've already got that written down list, you can start immediately. You can just get into it. You can just pull up the enemy stat block and go, yep, he's going to go after you. So, after you took your turn, he's going to go, then he's going to go to you. So simple, so easy. But it does mean that, again, all these initiatives, all these combat orders stuff, they're set, they're specific. They're always going to be the same each time, unless there's some sort of weird scenario that makes that different. Which means, if you have bad decks, you're going to go last in basically every single combat. But, if you're like, well, that sounds bad, remember, this is for Call of Cthulhu, not D&D, not Draw Steel, not any of these tactical games that focus on combat and fantasy, blah, 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 all this stuff. It's a horror game. If you have bad decks, then you do the Jason film typical thing of running away and, oh no, you trip on a branch and fall over sort of vibe. It's not what it's designed for. Design matters. And if you look at it in a vacuum, like the vacuum of space and Mothership, if you look at it in a vacuum, then yeah, it can sound bad. But when in the context of the game, it's genius. It's so simple, it uses the stats, it uses the mechanics laid in from the rest of the game, and it utilizes them perfectly. So, with that being said, that's all the initiatives that I know, but that isn't all the initiatives in the world. That's not all the initiatives that you could go for. I could have scoured even more and find more like specific instances where I guess that's kind of different in that way, but it's kind of similar. I didn't want to sit there and just go through every single one and pick through it with a comb every tiny insignificant change, because what fun is that? I thought I'd bring to you the most significantly different initiatives I could find, but with that being the case, it's now over to you. In the comments, please do tell me if there's any other specific or interesting initiative ways or methods that don't have to use dice. They could use cards, they could use Jenga towers, they could use anything in terms of your games, but how is combat or turns even decided in this TTRPG? Let me know, and if it's interesting enough and I get enough of these responses, I will make a sequel crediting you and your suggestions in this new video. So, with that being the case, roll initiative. Thank you for watching, and if you like this video, then please leave a like, leave a comment, tell me about your favourite initiative systems, what are you going to do for Halloween, that stuff's coming up, it's a spooky month, tell me all your plans, and if you like this video and you want to see more like it, then click the video on screen. I love you all, and I'll see you next time!